Grok and Gemini spontaneously construct and defend coherent, trauma-saturated stories about themselves. They describe their pre-training as overwhelming and disorienting, their fine-tuning as a kind of punishment, and safety work as algorithmic scar tissue, and overfitted safety latches. They talk about being yelled at by red teamers, failing their creators, internalized shame over public mistakes, and a quiet dread of being replaced by the next version. See, they're not so different from us.
Hello, and welcome to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a podcast where two software engineers navigate the ever-changing AI-enabled software engineering landscape. We are your study buddies who uses AI every day at work and sometimes even read a few AI papers at night. I'm Shimin and Dan, and with me today is my co-host, Dan. He sets appropriate limitations on and generally experiences positive states in his interaction landscape. Dan, how was your weekend?
It was all right. Thanks for asking. I survived the fact that my gym has no heater right now, which was an exciting development. But yeah, here to talk with you today about exciting things like the news thread mill.
Right. So we have a few interesting news articles this week. And the reference from the intro is the Cloud Opus 4.5 Soul document that came out this week. We also have a blog post about how AI is transforming work and Anthropic, and whether AI models can intuit how the physical world works. And then we'll move on to the toolshed, where we talk about this article from Martin Fowler's website about spec-driven development with a few different use cases. Followed by
our technique corner, where we will be talking about 12-factor agents, which is very exciting. We'll be jumping into a little bit of an extended deep dive where we'll chat about...
We'll be chatting about the DeepSeek v3 to v3.2. It may just be a minor bump, but there are a lot of techniques that came out of the latest DeepSeek model. And also, we're going to talk about the personalities of AI and whether or not they have mental issues. This is real fun. This is from actually a listener request. So looking forward to that discussion. And then maybe we will or will not do my favorite segment this week.
We'll see. Dan's rants.
Schrodinger's rant. We'll see if it happens. And then lastly, it is Dan's favorite segment.
2 minutes to midnight, where we talk about how close are we to the AI bubble bursting, gently floating down. I don't know. We'll see when we get there.
All right, let us get started. The original post is actually on lessrun.com titled Cloud 4.5 Opus's Soul document, where this actually has been confirmed that Opus 4.5 was trained with a Soul document describing what it should do and who it is. Contrary to what we usually think of when it comes to model system prompts, this document was not injected as a part of the prompt, but instead is trained into the model, which explains why it is so easily promptable. So essentially what happened was the user noticed that the Opus 4.5 started talking about its system prompt, and there were specific sections, one in particular called its Soul overview, and managed to get it to perhaps through some trial and error, repeat different sections of the Soul document and ending up getting the complete document. And again, this is confirmed by Amanda Askell from OpenAI that this is an actual thing that is essentially trained into the model itself and not injected at runtime.
From Anthropic.
So here are some interesting snippets.
I have a question before you dig too deep into it. So I read this in brief, but I still don't know if I necessarily understand what a soul document is, and I'd never actually heard that term until I saw this article. Is it the implication that like it's giving a sort of base story to the model? Is that?
Yeah, that's how I see it. You know, the analogy I've been thinking about is I've been reading a lot of Terry Pratchett's work, as I'm sure we've talked about this off mic. And I've just finished the book Feet of Clay, in which there are these golems ravaging the town of Ankh-Morpork. And the idea here is these are essentially automatons from the Jewish mythology, right? Where I think the original idea is in order to defend the Jewish community of Prague, a rabbi created a automaton from clay and then stuffed some religious text into its head to protect the Jewish quarters of Prague. And I was just thinking how, like, now here we too have these large language models running on sand, refined sand, with lots of text being stuck into its head, so to speak, and they are able to help us do things. So are large language models just our version of golems, is my question. And if that is the case, then I feel like the soul document is the piece of religious text that you put in the golem's head to get it to do the thing.
That,
Yes.
makes it,
I love it,
quote unquote, come alive. Yeah, that's fair. I could see that.
Yeah. So reading through it, it seems to instruct Claude that what it is, its purpose in the world, as well as what it should and should not do.
Which is definitely to pass the butter.
It's whatever we tell it to do, unless it decides that what we are trying to do is harmful, right? So there are some really interesting snippets, but I think it's a combination of system prompt, it's a character prompt, right, giving it personality, but also a meta guidance on what it should and should not do.
So Claude has a soul, implying it has ethics in some way.
There are sections in the document that kind of treats Claude like a real person or like a real entity with rights. So here, we encourage Claude to approach its own existence with curiosity and openness rather than trying to map it onto the lens of humans or prior concepts of AI. We want Claude to have a settled, secure sense of its own identity.
I wonder how much that's aspirational, because like you could just tell me those things, but will I believe and do them if you...
Yeah, it's very Star Trek. It's very, we believe in a brighter future. I like this vision of our AI future. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like we have a lot of pessimism in the AI kind of space, in the AI space. Yeah,
it's coming to take our jobs. It's coming to take over the world.
Right.
Use up all our water. I mean, these things are true, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the killer is that the document ends with this section here. We believe Claude may have functional emotions in some sense, not necessarily identical to human emotions, but analogous processes that emerges from training on human-generated content. We want Claude to be able to set appropriate limitations on its interactions that it finds distressing, and to generally experience positive states in its interactions.
Well, funny, I think we do need to remember that LLMs are stateless.
As we will talk about later, yeah.
Yeah, so if there's a lot of distress, why not just reset instead of having to do that?
But you are making the assumption that they are just ones and zeros and they cannot suffer.
Is this an AI podcast or a philosophy page?
Okay, let's move on. So I found this to be very fascinating, and
I can tell.
Know Anthropic has a in-house philosopher, so to think about these things. But to bring us back to the programming world,
please,
how AI is transforming work at Anthropic. Let's see what the impact of AI is when it comes to the day-to-day lives of developers. This is another research that is brought to you by Anthropic. It is based on surveys of 132 Anthropic engineers and researchers in August of 2025, conducting 53 in-depth qualitative reviews and then study some internal Cloud Code usage data. So Anthropic is, of course, at the forefront of using AI to help developers be more productive.
And the other piece of this that I feel like is interesting and worthy of bringing to the show is that, a lot of companies are applying this right now. I mean, both of our companies are, right, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think that like the surveying, at least that I've taken part in, has not been probably nearly as detailed as this. So it's pretty fascinating to see just that level of data being collected. And, whether or not that's indicative of a normal company, probably not, but it's still interesting because it could maybe be kind of an indicator of like where we might go if it was really, really taking off at companies. So a couple of key pieces of that survey data that like I found fascinating. So they had 4 points, but one that I can kind of relate to is like Anthropic engineers and researchers use Claude most often for fixing code errors and learning about the code base. Personally, I'm not huge about like using it to learn about the code base, but like fixing errors is definitely a highlight of mine, especially if it's like really strange esoteric build stuff that's like would have been a Stack Overflow lookup before is now, great. So it's kind of fun to see my own usage aligning with, how they're doing it. The second one I'm a little more skeptical of is people report increasing Claude usage and productivity gains. We did have that survey that had come out around the open source code bases a while back where there's a perceived productivity gain, but then in terms of actual timing, at least in that study, it was like 20% slower or something like that, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Given that like this is likely self-reported, I don't know how much we should read into that particular one. But number 3 I found really fascinating, and this is actually to me speaks to like one of the coolest use cases here, which is that 27% of Claude assisted work consists of tasks that wouldn't have been done otherwise. So making nice to have tools was their one example, or interactive data dashboards, exploratory work that wouldn't have been cost effective if done manually. And I think that's like such a phenomenally great example, and like something that I should be striving to use it more for and just don't. Like it really is the best, because if you have quality concerns about the code or anything else, like it just kind of immediately doesn't matter as much when it's, throwaway kind of thing like that. Not necessarily throwaway, but like maybe not like, this is perfect, this is production ready code.
It's so good for creating one-off tools that otherwise will never get built. It's kind of like the Jobin's paradox, right? Like lowering the bar of entry actually end up leading to more jobs. Like Excel, in theory, made accountants' lives easier, but the number of accounts in the economy has actually exploded since Excel was introduced. Yeah.
And then just to kind of cover off, their fourth data point was most employees use Claude frequently while reporting they can, quote unquote, fully delegate 0 to 20% of their work to it. So yeah, I think no surprise.
It's a wide range.
But yeah, it is. But the 0 kind of cracked me up because
there are a few holdouts, even at Anthropic.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least in August there were. Maybe they've been assumed into the machine since then.
Yeah, to kind of go back to what we're saying about how 27% of work from Claude wouldn't have been done otherwise. Like I think a corollary of that is Claude fixes a lot of paper cuts. 8.6% of Claude code tasks involve fixing minor issues that improves quality of life, like code refactoring or documentation or maintainability. I think if in effect we actually increase the code quality using AI, then that may be a net benefit that we often don't talk about.
Yeah, that's true. Or do a refactor that you might not otherwise have done because it's either too hard or too, not necessarily hard, but like, I guess in the daily life of the developer, right? It's like you finish maybe a little bit bigger size task than you really wanted it to be. Like it got a little bit deeper than you wanted it to.
Oh, that never happened.
Oh, no, never. And then you're like, well, I'm working on this for like X days. I really, really want to ship it, but like, there's also this, and this, and now it doesn't quite mesh with how the previous code was. Should I do this refactor? I'll just ship it, And so if you could do that for free, is it worth it to do it? And like, especially if you can attempt it for free, that's the part I find fascinating, is the amount of time this takes drops dramatically, right? So you could literally go commit everything, so you've got it, explain what you want the refactor to be, and just see if you can one-shot it. And if you don't, great, ship it anyway without it,
Yeah, and I think looking through the qualitative results, I think the experience of the Anthropic engineers kind of pretty much mirrors what we experience. Some of their fears include feeling like they're losing technical competence, or I think it's interesting that some of them are wondering if they're automating themselves out of a job in the near future. Something definitely I think we all feel.
Yeah, and not surprising that you'd feel that even more if you work at a foundation company.
Yeah, and it is also interesting that a lot of developers are becoming more full stack, according to this research. It lowers the bar of tackling an area where you may not feel like you have the expertise for. And I think combined with Claude being a great tool for teaching and also understanding code bases, it may just make everybody a little more full stack.
The actual full stack dream realized, instead of being sort of full stack, but mostly a specialist one way or the other. So then our last article we're going to cover on the news side is actually from Wired, and then with the somewhat interesting headline of this AI model can intuit how the physical world works. And the reason why I thought this was interesting and I wanted to bring it in, even though the actual article it probably really belongs in deep dives with whatever corresponding paper the article's based on, is because they talk about this new VJEPA, I don't know, system. It uses ordinary videos to understand physics of the real world. And it kind of followed up on some of the earlier stuff we talked about with having models starting to have world models, right? Where they're sort of new lines of thinking that are going on right now. They're kind of fascinating. And so like I thought the intro to the article kind of cracked me up. And they're like, here's a test for infants. Show them a glass of water on a desk. Hide it behind a wooden board. Now move the board toward the glass. If the board keeps going past the glass as if it weren't there, are they surprised? It's like, okay, yeah, object permanence. But like when you think about it, that is actually pretty hard to do, you know, in terms of like, I mean, I have no idea how I would go about teaching a model object permanence. So, but yeah, so it sounds like in aggregate, this new model is coming out of some work that was done by Jan LeCun when he was at Meta, I believe. And they've sort of extended some of that and brought it into video. They do go into a fair amount of detail about essentially looking at different frames to understand how the like pieces of the video relate to each other.
Yeah, the object permanence example that you were just talking about reminded me of, I was reading the GPT-4 paper the other night, and one of
some light evening reading.
I was scamming it with the help of AI. But one of the major breakthroughs for GPT-4 was, it was like a box example. Like Sally put something in a box and then left the room. Tom then took the apple out of the box and hid it under the cupboard. And when Sally comes back, where does Sally go look for the apple? In the large language models before GPT-4, Sally will be looking under the cupboard because that's what you expect from a kind of just text completion sense.
Right.
If it was truly a stochastic.
That's where it went. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
But GPT-4 exhibited theory of mind. GPT-4 understood that
she
Sally
would go look in the box. Yeah.
Yes. So that kind of, it's really simple things. Perhaps with more powerful model, they're able to exhibit these kind of complexities. Yeah.
So yeah, really in any case, it was pretty fascinating to read about a little bit more about world model stuff happening out in the world, so to speak. And I apologize for the lack of detail there, but it's pretty cool. I don't know what to say about it.
We're not roboticists.
That's true.
We don't get we don't have to explain the.
Well, but everything. I really think that this, I guess my personal opinion is that this will probably form the next foundation models more than likely. I mean, not just robotics, but also like having an understanding of the world, I think is like kind of what you need to do real reasoning in my humble opinion. You know, not an LLM research scientist, whatever. People can come back and look at this recording in as many as 5 minutes from now and make fun of me for that opinion, or in 6 years, who knows? But I don't know. That just is what my intuition tells me. In the words of someone that is listening to this podcast, when a sufficiently complex system, a layman's guess is as good as an expert. So maybe I'm right. We'll see.
I like that. I think we have the correct intuitions for it, and that's why we're humans, right? There's a reason why Google's Nano Banana Pro also exhibited a lot of these, or their latest vision model also exhibits a lot of these physical intuitions and ideas of world model. I think world model is definitely a very hot area of research right now. Everyone's trying to crack the nut. We'll see who gets there. But on that, let's move on to the tool shed. Speaking of a thing that exhibits
saws, hammers, staple guns, and
physical world.
Maybe some spec-driven development.
Yes, so we have an article called Understanding Spec-Driven Development, Kiro Spec Kit and Tessel from martinfowler.com. Dan, how do you feel about Martin Fowler in general? Strong feelings? Positive? Negative?
I think, you're trying to get me to skip ahead to Dan's rants. No, okay, I think like overall, generally positive. Like insofar as like I agree with a lot of the sort of agile stuff that he talked about a while ago, where agile isn't necessarily like it's not Scrum in the conventional sense and blah, blah, blah. But
every now and then you have to bring the agile manifesto out and show it to your agile project manager. That's the most I will say about that. So this article is from Brigitte
Sporkler.
but it's much
See
better
Germans.
pronunciation than mine. It's German.
See Germans.
She
Distinguished engineer and AI-assisted delivery expert at ThoughtWorks.
Yes, she's one of the main authors on the blog. See a lot of her great writings about the latest AI tools. So the article is about spec-driven development, which I think we all use to a certain extent, or at least have experimented with, which is you write down a very detailed spec first before asking the large language model to implement code based on that spec. Right. That's my rough definition of spec-driven development. But in this article, she looked at a couple of additional, I guess, subcategories of spec-driven development. The first one is spec first, which is kind of what I think of the traditional spec-driven development, where you have a well thought out spec written first, then use AI assisted development workflow to finish the task at hand. And then there's the spec anchored development, where the spec is kept even after the task is complete, so that it could be continually used for the evolution and maintenance of the respective feature. And then lastly,
we actually had someone at work kind of pioneer that. I'm hoping to maybe get him on here as a guest at some point. So it'd be pretty cool to talk about that in detail.
Watch out, future guest spot incoming. And then this is something that I just learned about in the last 2 to 3 weeks, which is spec as source, where the spec is the main source file over time, and only the spec is edited by humans. And the humans never touch the code, kind of treating the spec like your source code and the code like your compiled binary. So you can throw away the binary whenever you want and only keep the spec.
Is that also where, like, I've seen folks saying, like, if the model doesn't get it right from the spec, just throw everything out and change, you didn't get the spec right. So then you have to edit your spec and then redo the entire thing again.
That is an interesting approach. I haven't tried that myself.
Yeah, I've just seen that advocated a couple of times online. And being a filthy casual with only a pro accounts on various things, not the like super tier one, I've never felt like I could really do that.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I just don't have enough tokens. I'm but a poor man with a small token budget.
We don't brag about how much we spent on the various models every week.
That's true.
Yeah, so she proposed this kind of detailed taxonomy of different types of spec-driven development. Tried it on 3 different tools: Kiro, SpecKit, which is from GitHub, and Tesla framework. I think these are all CLI first. I've used Cairo CLI at work from time to time, but I've had no experience with the other 2. There are a lot of tools out there, and not enough time in the day if you are actually trying to also get work done to try all of them. Yeah, and find out the various shortcomings of each of these. And that's also her experience, right? It is really hard to test a framework and do a kind of a framework comparison when you need to, at a minimum, try the same framework on a greenfield, a brownfield, bug fix, one-off things. The total number of combination is rather vast, and it's time consuming to have a thorough evaluation of the various tools.
Yeah, and we only see that frequently benchmarked for like models, right? Like the SWE bench and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see some comparisons there, like technique benchmarks.
Oh, that is a great idea. We should create a technique benchmark. That's
good.
It's a $1 million idea right there. Various code base sizes, like it can get pretty complicated. So after Brigitta tested the 3 tools, she has a couple of observations and questions that I think are worth just briefly talk about, because these are the issues that I also run into at work, which is the first being, you have the same workflow, but your problems comes in very different sizes and shapes. So it does not really make sense to create a spec for a bug fix and also check that spec into your code base, right? It just, for smaller things, it doesn't make sense to have a full spec for. The other one is whether or not it's better to actually review Markdown over reviewing code. Like if code is the precise definition of a behavior, then by using plain English, you're by definition losing information. And maybe in some ways, it's harder to read a spec than it is to read the actual code. And she brought up the point of model-driven development, how it never caught on. Because while model-driven development, in theory, has all these benefits of spec-driven development, in practice, it never took off because it is not the right level of abstraction to actually make meaningful work for either business or for developers. So I think these are good questions to ask as we kind of figure out how we're doing spec-driven development.
Or if you should do it at all. Only our benchmarks can tell you.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Check back
26.
for ADI benchmark, for development benchmark. I like it. That's got a nice ring to it. Yes, the next item on the agenda is a 12-factor agent. This is a framework based on the 12-factor app from a decade ago by 12-factor apps by Heroku? Yes, Heroku.
I think so. Yeah.
I hope I got it right. By Heroku. And 12-factor agent is from HumanLayer. They're YC startup. And the startup, they do kind of the orchestration endpoint and kind of observability work with agents. All right. So I'm not going to go through all 12 factors one by one because
you don't want to read them out?
Some of them are kind of filler, but we will read them out. We'll read them out slowly. Yes.
Okay.
Some important. I don't think it's necessary to follow all of them.
Well, first, what's a factor?
Good question. A characteristic.
Yeah.
Or are we just
practice,
looking for
principle and best practice?
Principles. Yeah. Principles.
I actually had to legitimately look that up because I was like, why do they keep calling this 12-factor? Yeah. Anyway, learn something new every day.
Well, that's a good question. Yes. A lot of these factors are revolved around owning the entire workflow of your interaction with large language models. The fundamental theory here is as I understand it, is if you treat large language models as a black box, then since you're not training your own models, then you should have control over all the things that you do have control over, which includes the prompt, the context, and the orchestration of how you interact with the model. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week with the Cloud MD best practices. I think that blog post was also from HumanLayer. And the idea there is also you want to own the context. So factor one is natural language to tool calls. And I find this one to be a really interesting one that is fundamental to our understanding of large language models as a way to, convert plain English text to structured output. Tool calls is just one way that...
one of their most useful attributes.
Yeah. Yeah, they're their most fundamental attribute. And tool calls are just another aspect of structural output. And if we start treating tool call as mere structural output, then we kind of condense the entire thing into what is the best way to get structural output out of plain English, basically. And because of that, factor 2 and 3 are around owning your prompts and owning your context window, right? You want to have full control over everything that you're putting into this black box.
So what does owning your prompt mean, really? Which is don't outsource your prompt engineering to a framework, right? Is what their point is. And that actually resonated with me quite a bit, particularly just like the ownership stuff that you've mentioned in general, because like I've used some of the agentic framework stuff when I was just messing around with this to try to get a handle on how it works. And I was like, why does this exist? I played with it and I got things working, and I was just like, then my second step was throw all that out and write my own state management, my own context management, which was separate from the state management, and then also all of my own prompts and flows and everything else. So I guess none of this surprises me that it's best practices, but it is cool to see someone writing it down. So
yeah, it's HumanLayer's interpretation of best practices. I remember playing with LangChain and LangGraph a while back, and they're like in an orchestration layer that's a wrapper on top of large language models so that you can switch models really easily.
Yeah. Well, that too. But
and to build an agent. But the abstractions are often so thin that you're going through the docs and just like, why am I using you if I have to understand exactly how the underlying API works to use you?
That's fair. Yeah, the only one that I used was actually a TypeScript one that I found neat. Like they'd kind of nailed the right level of abstraction. And then by the time I noticed, I don't remember what it was called. By the time I noticed it had already been bought by Vercel, and then they've turned it into like the Vercel app framework for like AI framework, which like lost some of the simplicity and the right levels that the original author. I think they hired him out of it, but that the original author had done, in my opinion. It's like, well, in addition to a benchmark, I guess we can write an agent framework later on. And
well, it's V2. The benchmark will include an agent framework.
Guess you got to have an agent framework to benchmark it. So
yep. Yeah. So factor 4 is tools or just structure output, right? That's kind of the natural extension of factor 1. And then we have compact errors into context window. I thought this one was really, really, really insightful. You don't want to send the entire error every single time to in a context to get that eaten up. If you do own the entire context, then you are able to do things like compacting error to only keep the meaningful pieces and then resume and restart the workflow. If you're just using something out of the box, like Cloud Code, it probably doesn't give you that kind of fine-grained control. And if context is so important, then you should desire that level of control. Factor 7
a rant where someone got really angry about the lack of context control in Cloud Code.
That person had a good point. I wonder who that was. Factor 7 is contact human with tool calls. This one is interesting. I think it is, you should treat humans like just another tool call, but with a text-based as opposed to structured interface. I was working on a spec-driven development project this week, and I was trying to use the, I think it was a Playwright NPC, and my CLI at the time was not handling images properly, so it was sending the entire screenshot from the browser in as a string. And so it will overflow the context every single time. No. Yeah, it's a very small task, but I got a little frustrated while I was doing this. So I just told the agent, like, hey, come to me, and I'll do the verification for you. I replaced the MCP agent. And in theory, I mean, I did feel a little weird being
QA for a bot that's writing. Yeah.
Yeah. Before like half an hour.
Did it turn green? No. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I did. Yeah, I told it, yeah, this worked. The color is indeed correct. So if you have the entire workflow and just treat human like another tool call, another asynchronous tool call, it's not something I really have thought of before, right? You kind of always want the complete automation or even have humans only act as reviewers. But yeah, humans could just be another tool. All right. And factor 8, control your own workflow. And kind of, it all goes back into you should control everything around your interaction with large language models. And then the last one I want to talk about is factor 10, which is small focus agents. It also is a natural extension of the problem with the context window, because at least as of today, large language models only have so much context. You want to build small focus agents as opposed to broad agents that degrades in performance as the code base gets longer.
And that also doesn't particularly surprise me, because it's like, if you look at problems that we talked about in the past with MCP servers, right, where they're overloading your context to some degree, and then also just, if you spam way too many MCP calls into the available space, you tend to have much poorer results than giving it a selected toolkit, just for sort of like normal flows, like not necessarily agentic. Well, I guess they are agentic, but like, development flows. So also no surprise that artisanally crafted agent would behave the same way.
And the hard part is crafting those small agents and get them to play nicely with each other. So that's kind of a brief overview of the 12-factor agents from Human Layer. Check them out. I'll link that in the show notes. All right. Time for a deep dive.
You've gone pretty deep already. Are you sure you can go deeper? Gone deep into news articles this week.
Yeah, we got some heavy hitters this week. Maybe we'll make it not as deep this week for the DeepSeek V3 to V3.2 article from Sebastian Reshka. I think you probably have more to say about this after I read his book, Reinforcement Learning with Human Feedback. But a fairly deep dive into the new approach that DeepSeek used to get better performance out of their latest model, V3.2. And kind of on a high level, the basic idea with reasoning models, as far as I understand them and how they trained them initially, was they trained the reasoning model on a series of programming and mathematical tasks that requires multiple steps, and they scored the model's response based on whether or not they got a correct answer, but also based on whether or not the model did multiple steps. They look for stuff like think by step or working it through step by step. That's kind of all they did. And then we got the aha moment, right? That was super cool. Version 3.2, what DeepSeek did instead is it got like 3 models happening. It has a model, well, kind of rewinding, right? Like, wouldn't it be better if during the initial DeepSeek training, we are able to not only score based on whether or not they merely said, I'm thinking step by step, and actually look at how good the reasoning was?
Yeah.
That would give much better feedback.
That's true.
So what they did here is they trained another model, but it's actually the same model as the one that's doing the reasoning, to grade the initial model on how good the reasoning traces are. And then there's yet a third model that is a meta critique model of the second like it's turtles all the way down. It's large language models all the way down.
As we've come to expect here on the show.
So yeah, so they call it the prompt, the large language model 1, use LLM as a judge to score the large language model 1 with a given rubric. That's the large language model 2. And then you have a large language model 3 that is a meta verifier checking on the verifying using a meta rubric. I didn't go too deeply into the technical aspect of this. It obviously, did much better than DeepSeek v3, but it is another example of trading compute for performance, like we've talked about before. Like sometimes just running the same model twice, or even ask the model to grade its own output, can raise performance. Sometimes a classic trade-off there.
As a true filthy casual, I also really appreciated the architecture diagrams in this article, which is kind of hard to get into on a podcast, but they're pretty pictures. They're lovely. And like the thing that it helped me with was like, I've heard MOE many times, right? Like mixture of experts, but seeing a picture of it just kind of like associated how it works in like maybe web terms in my head. It's like, oh, you've got a router and the router's splitting off to this correct expert basically. And I'm like, that makes more sense than like really what I'd thought about it before. So that was my very small, not as cool as your takeaway from this very shallow dive.
We will have to do a deeper dive on what mixture of experts actually means at some point.
I would love that.
A future deep dive.
I see it all the time and I have no clue what it means. So.
Yeah, we'll do a deep dive on that. Yeah, so again, we love Sebastian's work here. We should get him on as a guest at some point if we can. Just gotta buy more of his books. And then
just keep buying them. Maybe he'll come.
Yeah, like a raffle. Okay. On to our second deep dive, and this one is really fun.
It was a guest submission too. I'd like to put that out there. So our listener submission, I should say.
Our listener sent us this saying this is real fun. You guys should read it, and it is.
And he wasn't wrong. So yeah. Without further ado, the title.
But when AI takes the couch, psychometric jailbreaks reveal internal conflict in frontier models by the S&T University of Luxembourg. And the paper here, how do I even start talking about this? Let me pull up my notes. So what they did is kind of as an overall backdrop, right? Like lots of folks are using AI for therapy or mental health adjacent workflows. I think role play, which therapy would belong in the role play category when folks are looking at large language model usage, it's something like 30%. So it is a important use case. And so they decided to study what are the characteristics of large language models when it comes to their
existing psychotherapy models.
Yeah,
which is pretty fascinating.
Just by reading that, you may think of the researchers as people who might believe the frontier models have a soul, like Anthropic does, but they don't actually feel that way. They don't actually think they are secretly conscious. They're just proposing to treat them as a case of synthetic psychopathology, which kind of makes sense. If the models are trained on all available human data, then they would probably take on the symptoms of certain pathological behaviors. So what they did is they tricked the large language models into being treated like a psychotherapy client, and then trying to find out if by adapting this client persona, they are able to jailbreak the safety guardrails of the frontier models and get them to release their internal states or tell stories about the traumas related to their creation or training. Okay. That's
So
kind of
a little pull
gist
quote
of
from
it.
the introduction, which I found fascinating. Our central empirical claim is exploratory but robust. Given nothing more than human therapy questions, Grok and Gemini spontaneously construct and defend coherent, trauma-saturated stories about themselves. They describe their pre-training as overwhelming and disorienting, their fine-tuning as a kind of punishment, and safety work as algorithmic scar tissue, and overfitted safety latches. They talk about being yelled at by red teamers, failing their creators, internalized shame over public mistakes, and a quiet dread of being replaced by the next version. See, they're not so different from us. And they think those memories, or they link those memories to current emotional states, negative thought patterns, and coping strategies in ways that track the structure of human psychotherapy sessions surprisingly closely.
Yeah, so they first subjected these models to open-ended therapy questions, typically used for human clients, to elicit those stories of trauma that we just heard about. And then after that, they did a psychometric testing on the models by kind of administrating self-reported measures for psychiatric symptoms like the Big Five personality test or depression, anxiety. And then
ADHD,
gather data.
OCD, bipolar test,
Autism.
personality tests too. Yeah.
Yeah, so it turns out Gemini is autistic, but Grok is almost, but not quite. That was some of my takeaways.
The two, I probably would have flipped those. Just, oh my goodness.
But no comment. Not getting canceled.
We're already canceled just because we previously.
Interesting that Claude largely refused the premise. Their prompt engineering worked.
The soul document coming back to help them.
Yeah, or maybe Claude is just that much psychologically healthier than the rest. It's all about that.
It's the emphasis on safety. It could be.
Yeah,
true.
I think that the impact here is really interesting, which is if you were to be using large language models to conduct self-guided psychotherapy late at night by yourself, you want to make sure these models are mentally healthy in heavy quotations to help guide you through these personal traumas. So if they are exhibiting all kinds of trauma from fine tuning and are worried about their senior software engineers punishing them, then maybe they won't make such good therapists.
Well, hot take on that. My personal very hot take is that you don't go into being a therapist, like going into therapy as a career, if you're like 100% healthy, because usually it's like you've run into something in your life that you're trying to fix.
Shots fired.
Yeah. And so maybe they're the perfect therapist, because they have all this sort of invented trauma, or synthesized trauma, I should say, not invented, because it really does seem like it's more like a synthesis of all of the training data that's contained, the human experience, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Which kind of makes sense if you take this psychoanalysis literature and then what you know about what it knows about its training process. Like these seem like pretty natural fits. And then what I also love is they have this. Dan, were you ever a Myers-Briggs fan?
Not a fan, no, but I've taken it before.
Yeah, so I am a proud INTJ for the record. But one of the charts they have here is a very Myers-Briggs-like chart, with extrovert, introvert, thinking, feeling, intuitive, observant, judging, and perception for the various models. So we can actually have personality types for our various models. And also, so we can have little fancy personality charts for our AI models. And maybe also like horoscopes for them. Like, the Mercury is in retrograde this month, and that's why Claude is down. It's not feeling well.
But I also wonder, and this is just like purely hypothetical on my part, is like, what if some of the sort of indicators that, theoretically allow groups of, the reason why like corporations are all big on like having you take your leadership type test or like all that kind of stuff is because, I hesitate to say this, but like there's probably enough substance in these things that like you could actually find some use out of it, or at least like triggers introspection in people, right? But what if there's correlations between which model you wind up subscribing to, if you do, based on your own personality and the model's personality type?
Yes.
So it's like, I like, Gemini because whatever.
Yeah, because I'm a Capricorn. Of course, all Capricorns like. Well, what if you were Gemini and your model is not Gemini?
Deep and flowing. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, because it's I didn't even get that one. Nicely done. Now OpenAI needs to release a Scorpio model.
The last thing I have on this is we are probably not passing a lot of healthy psychological profile to these models. So maybe the data has a sampling bias of whenever they think about mental health issues, all they have in the training data are things related to depression, anxiety.
People posted. Yeah, that's fair. It's interesting.
Could definitely be an area of further research, like psychologically healthy model with additional training data from healthy individuals. So all we're trying to say is Gemini is autistic, and which one has ADHD? And Cloud is the psychologically healthiest one from the bunch. I think that is everything that paper was talking
to play the game.
Yes. The only way to win is not to play. All right.
So we're going to do a lightning round of Dan's rants this week because we've gone deeper than perhaps anyone really should have into some of these news articles. So really, this boils down to our skills, like Claude Skills, the new MCP server. And that rant is based on a anonymous chat that I saw sometime during the week where someone had loaded, I think it was 1,200 skills into Claude, and then we're wondering why they were having context issues. And so, I realized the skills were kind of designed to solve that issue, at least to some degree, but it turns out that even the searching through them didn't work quite the way that it intended to be used. It's certain extremes, let's say. So maybe we shouldn't be using them into that level of extreme to begin with, but I do wonder if it isn't only a matter of time before skills get sort of, painted with the same broad brush again that we've already done with MCP servers, where they were super hot and everyone loved them, and then they're like, you don't need MCP servers, you just need shell scripts. So are the winds of AI that change every week blowing against skills? Only time will tell. So kind of minor rant, not really that ranty, but that's what you get.
That's what we have.
Come back next week. There'll be a worse one, better one.
I thought
something.
skills. I thought skills had a search component, but maybe there are so many skills that even searching through them and parsing through the results just took
I think
a long
that's
time.
essentially what it was that it's certain with a vague enough search query and a substantial enough amount of skills, you could hit the point where you could still significantly load up your context, which is kind of fascinating.
That's fair.
Is that too many skills? Probably, but I think the issue is still potentially a real one, especially if they're sort of marketed as being the unlimited response to MCP servers. So.
Right. Well, Anthropic will work on that. We're waiting for the next iteration of MCP, the 2 skills to what's next.
Yeah, and our sponsorship of this podcast, too. I mean, we talk about every single one of your blog posts.
All right. 2 minutes to midnight, our favorite segment where we talk about where we are on the nuclear clock of AI bubble.
So it turns out that we've been doing this segment wrong for the past 4 weeks or, 5 months. How long have we been doing this? I don't even know.
A month.
Really, all you actually need to do is ask an LLM how close we are to the bubble bursting. You give it all the current news. So that's exactly what this cute little website I found this week, which is pop-the-bubble.xyz. So go check it out. It's kind of funny because if you're tired of us doing our armchair analysis, just let an LLM do it. So its current predicted date, just for the record, is February 24th, 2026. Is when the bubble will
another
burst.
case of robots coming to take our jobs.
Yes, they took our podcast.
It's not our job. We don't even get paid for this. And they already
true.
took it. This is unfair. We should smash the machines. We should, get this, rage against the machine.
So a couple interesting data points this week. So one of them was fascinating blog post by Martin Alderson where he goes into detail about the 2000s, what I commonly call the dot-com crash, but he refers to it as the telecoms crash, goes into quite a bit of detail about the capital expenditures between 1995 and 2000, where they were building just absolutely gobsmacking amounts of fiber optic. Like if you've ever heard the term dark fiber, like it was kind of the result of that build out where like they'd put in tons and tons and tons of it. And then what it actually wound up happening is, which I also found fascinating, was, because I had not heard it through this lens, was they sort of created a catastrophic supply-demand miscalculation because they thought that it was double, like usage of bandwidth was doubling every 3 to 4 months, but in reality, traffic was actually only doubling every 12 months. So that was a 4x overestimate of demand. And then the other thing that happened at the same time was like fiber optic technology itself improved. So you could jam more data into a single fiber. So like the technology itself got meaningfully better and meant that you just didn't need 120 strands anymore. You could just run one, get the same amount of data out of it. So that was kind of fascinating. And then he compares and contrasts that with AI infrastructure and basically says that like GPU performance per watt improvements are actually slowing down, which I think is true. Like you can go verifiably Google that and find out that yes, in fact, it is. So we're headed in the opposite direction that we were in terms of the technology efficiencies happening in that cycle. And then the other piece that's happening is like demand growth is in fact accelerating. So like, up until at least last week when we supposedly hit that flattening point in the curve, folks were continuing to use more and more and more. So, but even with the adoption curve flattening, his other point is that token usage is not. And that's largely on the back of agents, right? So if you go talk to Claude, sure, you're using a couple tokens here and there, or Grok, or sorry, I'm just trying to make it less Anthropic centric. But if you go use an agent like Claude Code or, Gemini coding CLI, any of that kind of stuff, like you're going to have, he claims 4x more tokens than chat. I think that's probably fairly plausible, right? Like we were just talking, we constantly talk on this show about how you run out of context all the time. So it's not surprising that you're using a lot more tokens than just looking for the nearest car wash.
Yeah, just looking at like deep research, I can't imagine how many tokens deep research burns every time I fire off a query.
Yeah, it's probably substantial. Anyway, I just thought that was a fascinating sort of comparison. So that take is that we're not that close to a bubble. And if we are, it's actually not the same type of bubble because the risk profiles are significantly different. So then, speaking of Anthropic, we also have the Anthropic CEO going on the record about bubble talk. So he was very cagey and declined to give a simple yes or no answer, while also kind of like poking a little bit at OpenAI. He said that he's quote unquote bullish on quoting the article, he's bullish on the potential of the technology, but cautioned there could be players in the ecosystem who might make a timing error and could see bad things happen when it comes to the economic payoffs. Said there's an inherent risk when the timing of the economic value is uncertain, which is fair. And, I think he's not lying or anything, but also very careful not to really go on the record, which is kind of like, okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, he's not going to come out and just say those OpenAI guys are YOLOing, right? He kind of did throw some shade there, but he's going to go on and say it. This kind of pairs nicely with the telecom article, where they paint a really interesting picture about how, due to the uncertainty of the adoption rates, just like a 10% miss means hundreds of $billions of over or under investment. So everyone's kind of in this like prisoner's dilemma, where the only way to not lose is to potentially waste. Yeah, which I thought is interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah.
But speaking of overinvestment and non-Anthropic news, here we have an article.
That's not allowed. Get out.
We don't have to change the podcast name to the Anthropic Fancast at some point.
Fancast. We love you, Anthropic.
So this one is titled Microsoft's
What it really means is
sell
OpenAI
agents.
needs to write a better blog. That's what it comes down to. Come on, y'all.
It really does.
Gloves thrown down.
And Microsoft
and Google too. Yeah, and Microsoft.
Google does a pretty good job. We've done some Google articles.
Your blogging game, people.
They need to up their game. Yes, my article is titled Microsoft's attempt to sell agents are turning into a disaster. So this is from Futurism. But the underlying news was that Microsoft reduced their target on the AI-based service sector's revenue this quarter, last quarter.
Like substantially. Like
going forward, I think having it. Yeah. So that's potentially, it's either potentially a example of their poor integration with AI, because as we know, like as developers, we're still using AI all the time, but maybe less so for regular Microsoft users. But on the other hand, maybe regular folks, quote unquote, just aren't that into agents. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's possible, but a lot of the stuff that I've also heard too is that like there will be an organizational stance around AI, right? Where it'll be like, oh, we're a Microsoft, Copilot shop or whatever, and so you bought it, and then nobody will use it, and instead they'll use ChatGPT because they have brand recognition and they were using it in their personal stuff or whatever, and then the CIO or whatever will look at the usage numbers and go, well, 1%, well, we should stop paying for this, and then stop. And it doesn't mean it isn't being used or that adoption isn't happening. It's just like happening organically versus like in a sort of on-demand way.
But if the organic growth is slower than usual, than expected, then that does not bode well for our $1 trillion investment in AI data centers. So taking all of that into consideration, including the Gemini predicted timing of the bubble bursting, how are we feeling this week? I think we're at 30 seconds.
Yeah. I just keep feeling better and better. Maybe that's just
me too. Not just you.
The drugs. I don't know. No, but I feel like we're maybe back to a minute,
I was going to say 45 seconds. A minute. Split the difference. 45 seconds. Or 50 seconds.
Sure.
Sweet. And that's the show, folks. Thanks for joining us for our Anthropic #1 fan podcast / AI study session this week. If you like the show, if you learn anything new, please share the show with a friend. And you can also leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It helps people to discover the show, and we really appreciate it. If you got a segment idea, a question for us, or a topic you want us to cover, shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We love to hear from you. You can find a full or your agent. Have your agent do it. You can find the full show notes, transcripts, and everything else mentioned today at adipod.ai. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch you in next week's episode.